When you talk about consumption, I mean, we talk about the GST there, broadening the base, raising the tax. Do you support doing those two things, but with a quid pro quo?
Of course. No, you've got to compensate. I mean, that's what our community is all about, looking after the most vulnerable. And of course, the GST is regressive. And look, it's actually, if we're going to do this, we've got to start from scratch, as you said, because the GST goes to the states. So there's no point raising that. That's not going to help the feds out at all. So it's really starting again. And what you would do is actually a turnover tax. You wouldn't do a GST because it's easier to, or harder to avoid and easier to implement. So there's a lot of nuance to it. But yes, it is all about trying to hit that turnover/consumption side of the economy as a bigger burden, and then, of course, compensating those who are most vulnerable to it. I mean, to me, the GST is very similar to inflation in terms of cost of living. And we seem to be tolerant of the RBA allowing inflation to remain high for a long time. They've themselves said they could get it down quicker with higher rates. But we seem to be very intolerant of talking about raising the GST or reforming the GST.
Yeah, we are intolerant of that. So how does all of this fit in with what we've heard from Treasurer Jim Chalmers? And, I'm thinking about his essay now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it can all fit in. I mean, I think his broad vision in the essay is a great one in general terms. I mean, we've got to make sure we've got an economy that is effective and efficient and produces before we can start divvying up the pie, of course. So we've got to get that balance, but that's always been the case. And I think Jim Chalmers knows all this. I think the political constraint is that they don't want to do anything until they get another term. And they haven't got a strong position at this stage. So, look, I just don't think it's feasible. I don't think, as we're hearing, either side of the big two parties are interested. But in the end, the only way to do a major reform in this country is to get the two parties on side. And I think in reality, just like we saw in the 1980s, the Labor Party has to lead it and the coalition has to support it. And that's the only way we're going to get big change.
I was interested to see, and I enjoyed his piece this morning, that's Phil Curry. He said all of a sudden after the intergenerational report, the stage 3 tax cuts are back in vogue, quote unquote. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I always liked the stage 3 because they were reformed. They simplified the tax system, less tax brackets, less disincentive, particularly in those sort of middle incomes. But now it's absolutely critical with this inflation because we've got huge bracket creep. The Treasury is rolling in extra money because of inflation. And we're basically, the tax burden on us income earners is going up. So you need these stage 3 tax cuts just to reverse some of that. I don't think the government's going to go anywhere near getting rid of those.
No, nor should they. And to give the Teals some credit, they have not been the loudest voice by any means, saying the stage 3 tax cuts need to be wound back. And perhaps we just need a little bit of a better, more informed, less partisan, less lowest common denominator debate in Canberra, because we haven't got that, especially when you've seen the stage 3 tax cuts and how binary that argument has been.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stage 3 tax cuts are seen through the prism of fairness and, of course, reducing the tax incidence on high income earners. And there's merit to those arguments, of course. But
when you're talking about really high income earners and that wealth equation, Warren, I mean, they're not paying personal income tax. It's usually structured through companies, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, what you're talking about is people earning sort of 250 to 600 grand are probably going to be the real beneficiaries, not the super high income earners. But look, that's not the way to think about these tax cuts. It's about simplifying the tax system and making it less of a disincentive to work for people in middle Australia. And then, of course, the other thing is to hand back some of this bracket creep to all of us because, basically we're seeing a surge in income tax payments on the back of this inflation.
Warren Hogan, great to talk to you this morning. We've got to do this more often. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Laura.